Good morning, friends. Welcome to Studio 850. I'm John Singley, your host this morning, as always. And I want to remind everybody there's only two kind of people in this world: the panhandle citizens of Florida and those that want to be panhandle citizens of Florida. Joining with me this morning is a good friend of all of ours, John Herron. John lives in Pensacola. John is a citizen advocate to make sure that the municipalities in our area and actually throughout the state are doing the right thing with the rollout of the 5G technology, particularly the infrastructure, the poles and the transmitters and things that will show up in your various neighborhoods. Many of you may remember that we last visited with John back in August or September of 2020. We've been following his story with him for quite some time. And at the time, I think we were going around the neighborhoods of Pensacola, looking at various poles and structures that were being put up. And one of the groups that John had with him were some residents who also were expressing concern about the poles that were going up at his neighborhood. So, John, I want to revisit that for just a second with everybody and remind them what we were doing that day and what exactly was going on. So as I tried to locate this photo that I wanted to show everybody, so stand by with me. I'll get this thing up here in just a second. I think this is what we want to do here. That was a great day. I remember we drove around Pensacola and we looked at, I think we were over one of the parks in East Pensacola Heights in that area. So, John, who are these folks that were with us back last August? And tell us what we were doing that day.
Well, what we did on that day, we took a tour of Pensacola and visited some of the 5G sites and also some of the larger macro cell towers associated with 5G that are in Pensacola. That's Don with me on my right and Sina McDaniel on my left. And they've been engaged because they each, like myself, were surprised to get 5G poles near their homes. So what we did that day, we just took a tour of homes that were getting them installed directly in their front yards, sometimes right in front of their front doors, and spoke about the size of them and the impacts on the homes. But we also visited one of the macro cell towers sites, which everyone was led to believe that the 5G was nothing but the small cells and it wasn't imposing at all. And they were just very, very small in size. And they're not, they're quite large. And they're also associated with the macro cell towers as well. We're not only the macro cell towers are staying, but we're getting more of them and more antennas on them. So we kind of gave the Pensacola residents a direct view, if you will.
We certainly did. Yeah. So that's 6-7 months ago. And there's been progress made. And I wanted to bring John back into our audience. Expanding now, the audience is almost all the way over to Bay County, Walton County, Okaloosa, Santa Rosa. All people have joined with Studio 850 to follow as we are all call ourselves Panhandle citizens. So, John, you've got a little presentation that we want to talk about what's been going on since we last met with you. So I'm going to turn this over to you and let you bring everybody up to speed on the latest.
Well, thank you, John. I put together a presentation. This really does reach throughout the Panhandle, but also throughout Florida and across the country, really, is municipalities are dealing with this issue of how do we deal with technology, evolving technology, and at the same time, making sure that it doesn't contradict what our communities are about and the aesthetics of the communities, whatever they may be and whatever the broad range is. And specific to the Panhandle and South Walton Beach and Okaloosa County, these poles are going up suddenly along the beach and in front of homes. And a lot of times they're in sensitive areas near where birds nest and things like that. And also right in front of homes. Just a couple months ago, someone had a home built from Chicago. It was a home they plan on moving their family to. And we, of course, welcome people that want to live in our beautiful area. But he had this wonderful home built on the beach, went through the 2-year permitting process, and through that whole process, he had no knowledge at all that a 5G pole was going to be put up anywhere near his home. And when they moved in from Chicago to Pensacola Beach, boom, there was their surprise. It's a 5G pole. So the first slide, and what we've recently done, we've been trying to have a conversation with the city on this for about 2 years now, and we haven't had much progress at all. We also met at the county level, we met at the state level, and when you get involved with these different layers of government, what they all seem to say is they point you in a different direction and say there's nothing we can do about it, our hands are tied. And so what we did also, we petitioned directly to the FCC. And at the very end of the day, the folks that issue the permits and for the public right-of-way for these 5G poles, it's usually the city, if it's a city public right-of-way, or the county, if it's a county public right-of-way. And the issue we were dealing with in our neighborhood was a city public right-of-way. So we petitioned the FCC, basically saying the city is not following the proper process in issuing the permit in front of our pole, in front of the home of my neighbor's home.
John, let me jump in here just a second. Tell the audience what the FCC is and why they are involved in this.
Terrific. The FCC is the Federal Communications Commission, and they are the regulatory agency for anything that transmits radio waves, radio frequency waves, whether it be a ham operator with an antenna on the top of his home, someone who flies an airplane who talks on the radio, or the growing, of course, rapidly expanding area of wireless telecommunications. So when any telecom company, whether it be Verizon, AT&T, Sprint, T-Mobile, or anyone, wants to transmit a certain frequency, they have to seek permission from the FCC to do that. And the FCC will either grant or not grant the license to operate a certain frequency. So that's what the Federal Communications Commission does. And we came up with this idea because, frankly, someone sent us a bunch of public advertisements from a Miami newspaper where they were giving the public notice of 5G poles going up all over Miami. And that's something that we had not had in Pensacola. We had no notice. So we looked at the ads, and on all of the ads, it gave the location of the proposed pole, how tall it would be, but it also had an address for the FCC that explained that if anybody wanted to make an appeal specifically for an environmental concern or any other concern, it gave an address to reach out to at the FCC. So we went to work, did our homework, and put together a petition and filed a petition in regards to the pole near my neighbor's home. Now, what you see pictured there, it's 3 poles right here in Pensacola. And the one on the left is on 19th Avenue. It's right next to a home about 25 feet away from a home that's over 110 years old. And in the middle is a picture on 14th and Gregory Street. And that's a gateway to a neighborhood. And it's tough to see, it's a little dark, but that's 3 poles all together. And then on the right is a picture from inside of a home looking out. And that's right in front of the front door of a small historic cottage. And as soon as she walks out of her front door, boom, there's this 40-foot pole there. And you see some of the antenna equipment going on. What folks need to realize is that's just the start. And when other wireless companies want to join in, there will be more, and that will be compound co-location. So what we're seeing now is just the beginning. So if we can go to the next slide, please. The basis for our petition to the FCC is that 3 bases really is: 1, the environmental impacts weren't properly considered; 2, the historic impacts were not fully considered; and 3rd, the applications that were filed just were incomplete and didn't have enough information on them. And a lot of this arises out of a federal court decision back in 2019. and it's the Ketoa decision by the DC Circuit Court of Appeals. And what happened up to then is they planned on putting a bunch of these small cells on an Indian reservation. And the FCC says, hey, the environmental reviews and reviews like that, they just don't apply to 5G poles because they're small, they're like Wi-Fi routers, and they don't transmit any radiation at all, any more than a Wi-Fi router, and it's just not a big deal. And the DC Circuit Court of Appeals didn't buy it. They said, number one, you're putting these antennas on poles that are 30 feet tall, and you're putting them that high so that when the radiation comes down, it's a lower level and it doesn't exceed the limits that are set. And number two, you plan on putting hundreds, if not thousands of these in neighborhoods. So we're just not going to buy the argument that as a group, these are excluded from the rules. So we latched onto that, and that's basically the premise of our permit. Now, for us in East Hill, the 5G pole right in front of my neighbor's home is right near a bird area by Utahar. And we happen to have just like all along the Panhandle, frankly, we love our wildlife, we love our animals, and we treat them well. And we have a bald eagle that nests just a block away from this pole. We have a horned great owl that my neighbor sees routinely 40 feet from the pole. We have a family of red-tailed hawks nearby, just all kinds of wildlife, and they're all brought to Bayou Tahar by all the fish that are coming back. And it's really, it's a great story. We now routinely see dolphins coming back into Bayou Tahar. But the thing of it is that the environmental impacts just weren't considered at all in this. And this specific area, great historian from our area, John Appleyard, recently said, this is a bird sanctuary. And we, in fact, advertise our areas as ecotourism destination sites. So the point of this is this radiation does impact animals. And it was frankly to my surprise that there's at least 500, if not more, independent peer-reviewed research articles that say animals are affected by this. They all have some kind of magnetic guidance. They can land in fields. You look at them, they're all aligned in the same direction, even birds in different fields. And studies have been done. One of the top researchers, his name's Albert Manville. He was 17 years with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Group, and he's now a top researcher at Johns Hopkins University. And he has spoken out strongly on this. He's done studies in other countries, and he's looked at the radiation at 1/1000th of the permitted levels by the FCC. And he has found that there are impacts. They are measurable impacts. They can look at the bird's feathers, the plumage, how they interact, the birth rates, and they've seen impacts. And Professor Manville has actually seen this with bald eagles. So it is a big deal.
So, John, the threat to wildlife, potential harm to wildlife from these devices, these routers on poles, as the companies like to say, is one of my dogs is behind me here trying to join the circus. But so this is part of the petition that your group has alleged to the FCC that the harm to wildlife in these areas hasn't been fully taken into consideration. Is that what you're saying?
It hasn't been taken into consideration at all.
And so this is something that under the federal law, the FCC is to consider as it grants permits or allows the states to go forward with this. How does the FCC have any sort of influence over these local environmental issues?
Well, that's the interesting question. Our issue as people who live there is we just want to make sure we can continue to enjoy the increasing wildlife that we can. That's what we want. As far as the action taken, it is a federal action because at the end of the day, the FCC is the one that sets the RF radiation limits. So that's what brings it to a federal action. As far as whose job it is, like I said early on, everybody will point the finger at somebody else. It's like the Pink Panther and Chief Inspector Clouseau. It's not my dog. And that's the game that's played. We don't care who does it, but a legitimate bona fide environmental impact review should be done. Now, in the response to our petition, Verizon opposed it, not surprisingly, and they're the applicant in this case. And they conceded in their opposition that the radiation limits for the antenna planned for this pole will exceed the FCC general population limits 14 feet laterally and 10 feet vertically. Now that surprised us. Then the question is, what happens when birds latch onto that pole, land on that pole, or get within 14 feet vertically of that antenna? If they do, they're going to be subjected to radiation limits that exceed the human general population limits of the FCC. So without question, there will be impacts even by the FCC limits that are set right now.
So John, explain to the audience, what's the difference between the existing 4G structure that we all know and the rollout of the 5G infrastructure when it comes to harms to the wildlife? Is it the same? Is it worse under 5G? How does your group see that?
Well, it's a bigger question mark, if anything else, and potentially worse. And what 5G involves is, well, everybody has a different strategy, frankly. Some are going for there's high frequency, mid frequency, and low frequency. And a couple of the providers, namely Verizon and AT&T, went right away for the high frequencies. But to achieve those high frequencies, the problem is they get very fast speeds, but they don't travel very far.
That's right. Shortwave, right? Millimeter wave, right?
Right. And so I went to a presentation a couple of years ago, early on, when this first became an issue. And one presentation, the AT&T representative said they plan on putting poles every 250 to 750 feet in Pensacola neighborhoods. And a couple of us fell out of our chairs. And we asked the question, are you serious about that? Because that's a tremendous amount of infrastructure. And he said, oh, it's not going to be that bad, and that kind of a thing. But on the other hand, Sprint T-Mobile, and I think, now in hindsight, they seem to be having the better strategy. They went with the low frequencies, and they're not quite as invasive with their poles.
So John, can we, you have another point in your petition I want to get back to, and that is the impacts on this 5G rollout to historical structures. So let's take a look at this again, and because I think a lot of people in our audience take a lot of pride in the fact that Pensacola is a very historical city. We talk about marketing this to visitors to come here to enjoy the history, but we seem to pay lip service in many cases. We destroy historical buildings to build new structures on the property. And you have raised, and your group have raised the question of the review of these historical impacts and federal law when it comes to telecommunications. Talk to us about this. I think this is as important as the wildlife impacts.
Well, to be quite honest, John, that was the main thrust of our petition. And the home they planned on putting this pole was, as I mentioned before, it's about a 110-year-old home. And we initially asked the city, give us all the documents that you have related to this application. They made us go through the formal sunshine record request. The department that oversees these wouldn't let us review the documents associated with it. They told us go through sunshine, we did. And also we had, as far as historical review, was one email from a city planner. He's also a historical review expert. And he mentioned a couple of buildings in Pensacola, namely the Sanger Theater, the First Christ Church, again, on the National Historic Registration of Places. But he failed to mention in that email the P.K. Young house, which is half a block away from the proposed pole.
What do we know about the P.K. Young house?
Well, it was built in the 1920s, and a great doctor in the area owned it. And it's a magnificent home. If you look at it, it's terrific. And it is officially registered in the National Historic Registration of Places. And it wasn't mentioned in the initial email that we received. But even more important is the home that this pole is right next to. They didn't address that at all. And that home is even older than the P.K. Young home. And the state of the law in this area, and we've consulted with a few attorneys that are experts in this area, they say it's not that the home has to be registered. If it's potentially eligible for the National Historic Registration of Places, that's enough to trigger a proper historical review of any pole such as this that would go in the area. And the home really does have a rich history here. When the railroads first came to Pensacola in the 20s, the president of the railroad, Frisco Rail, his name was James Kern, he lived in this home. And his family lived in this home for, I think, about 6 decades. And they actually owned the property behind it. They had an Olympic-sized swimming pool in the back, and all the neighborhood kids would swim there and things along those lines. But, you know, for the Frisco Rail, which was a big deal in the 20s when they came to Pensacola and opened the gateway for much of commerce for our area, and the fact that they were the longest inhabitants of this home, it does have a rich historical culture to our area. And it wasn't vetted. Now, after we filed this petition, 7 months afterwards, a few other historical documents review documents started appearing, and they weren't provided to us until 4 to 5 months after they had been purportedly been written. So we're thankful for getting those, but that's the kind of stuff that, you know, in a truly open and transparent process, they're going to be shared with people right away. And that really hits the mark with this issue of notice. And in the first picture, you started off with myself and Don and Sina together. The biggest issue is that people aren't getting notice. I just had a guy call me a couple of days ago saying, I got a pole in front of my yard and I didn't get notified. And that really upsets people, because when you don't give notice, they have no ability to become engaged in the process.
I've heard the Pensacola City Council recently talk about their desire to improve notice on a lot of things having to do with city code and city actions. What's the council doing? You've talked to some of them. Where are we on the improving notice, John?
Well, if you'll click to the 2 slides ahead, if you would, that'll help me a little bit to give a little background right there. And I will address that, but first by background, what you see right now is the FCC order that brought this all about, where cities were preempted to a large extent by the state and by the federal government. And when this order came out that you see there in 2018, Pensacola is mentioned 3 times in there as supporting preemption. And at the same time, the mayor at the time, not the current one, but the previous one, wrote a guest op-ed in the Pensacola News Journal, and he promised us, hey, these 5G poles, no bigger than a backpack, not a big deal. All the large towers are going away, and you're going to get high speeds, and it's going to be great, jobs, jobs, jobs. And what we're learning is they're really big. The speeds aren't that fast. And well, we'll see about the jobs. But the point of it is Pensacola, unbeknownst to the people and to the city council at the time, has some significance in this whole 5G world. And we're still trying to figure that out. Secondly, when you first reported on this issue, 8 Verizon lobbyists and lawyers from Houston flew in to meet with our mayor. I was really, really surprised by that reaction. And thirdly, Verizon just announced that Pensacola is an ultra wideband city, along with big metropolitan cities like Seattle and Sacramento. And we're just not that size. But what that means is we're getting the higher frequencies. So the current city council, there's a couple things that disturb them. Number one, they weren't consulted about any of this stuff, with the Pensacola mayor doing what he did previously in writing this letter to the FCC saying preemption would be good and limiting the fees that we should charge wireless companies for this is good. They're not. I mean, cities across the country and the Florida League of Cities and everybody agrees local control of this is good. And it's different than what was conveyed previously. As to notice, they want notice to be given. The group that handles this, handles this is the Department of Public Works and Facilities, and they're trying to extend it out as late as possible. When the wireless companies first come to them, it's called a pre-application review process. They have a really good idea of where that pole is going to be. And the staff kind of wants to delay it off to later in the process. And there's a struggle between the two right now. And I think the city council needs to put their finger down a little harder in this regard. But at the end of the day, they can't direct staff how they handle these things. That's the job of the executive branch, not the legislative branch. The things that so the city council is trying to have notice provided. But in our case, we didn't get the notice until the permit had already been approved and issued. And that serves no purpose. It really does. Notice after the fact.
No, that plays to people's fears that their government isn't being transparent with them. And this is something we hear all the time, not only in the city, but in the county, our neighboring counties. This looks like an area that local governance can certainly make improvements on, John. And we at Studio 850 appreciate all the engaged citizens you work with in pushing for greater transparency. Let's circle back to the petition real quick and see if we can bring that discussion in for a landing. And then I want to move on to what is really behind the push to 5G. So let's, if you can, let's close out the petition discussion and kind of give us a view of what to expect next before we move on.
Well, the petition, we've filed the initial petition, Verizon responded, and we filed our reply. So it's really up to the FCC to make a decision at this point. We are represented by counsel, one of the top telecom attorneys in the country. He's from New York, and he advises cities across the country on how to strengthen their local ordinances that allow them to exercise the maximum authority that they can.
I think we live streamed a webinar you had with this attorney from Long Island, if I remember right.
Right.
And if anybody in the audience wants to take a look at that, you're sort of new to this discussion, on Studio 850 on our Facebook page there. If you just go to the search bar and put 5G in there, you can find that it was a very interesting, and I think this guy was giving you a pro bono sort of a roundtable discussion, if I remember right, huh, John?
Well, he did. We did hire him to do a comprehensive analysis of Pensacola's ordinance, and he gave us a 45-page analysis. It was a terrific job, and it really gives a glide path, if you will, for the city council in rewriting their ordinance, which they very much need to do, and they are in the process of doing, as I understand it.
And he's representing your group before the FCC.
He is. He offered to do that pro bono because this really is a situation of the first instance for the FCC to deal with this, where citizens have petitioned them in light of this federal court decision for a proper environmental review and historic review of a permit that's issued by a municipality.
And the FCC has accepted your petition?
They did. They accepted our petition. They assigned it to a pleading cycle, and that pleading cycle is now complete. And they directed all parties to stop work until this matter is decided. And that's an issue too, because there's been 3 separate instances of subcontractors just doing work anyway, despite this. We even put a sign up. The city code enforcement, we asked them for weeks to do that, and they did. but they put the FCC notice on there, and it's highlighted that work is not supposed to occur. And in one instance, a subcontractor showed up and he lifted the sign, moved it on the side of a tree, and then continued work anyway. My neighbor approached one subcontractor. We saw him doing measurements, and he asked him, what is he doing? Who does he work for? And does he realize that there's an FCC order saying work should not be conducted here? And he refused to tell us who he worked for, refused to give his name. And in fact, he said he's on a secret mission. I don't understand it. But anyway, the petition itself, it's in the hands of the FCC to decide. And, you know, I'm optimistic. I'm hoping for a favorable decision. We want a full environmental impact review. We want a proper historic review. We have a new administration. We have a new FCC commissioner. Her name is Commissioner Rosenworcel. She's been a career-long policymaker with the FCC. And, you know, she has some really good ideas on net neutrality and things like that. And we hope that that conveys as well into local authority and people doing things properly through a proper process.
When we always introduce our programs here, we always welcome the most engaged citizens in the Western Florida Panhandle. I'd have to elevate your group, John, right up to the top of the list to actually approach a federal agency with concerns, and the federal agency accept your petitions, your concerns, while local governments at the city and the state level may not have accepted your concerns as outlined in the petition, the historic review, the wildlife, having to do with the federal wildlife laws. So we applaud you. We're not going to pass judgment here of where we sit on the merits of the case, but we certainly think that when a group of citizens, maybe out of their own back pockets and with the help of friendly supporters, can rise to a level of national government petition of grievances, then I think that's something we can all be proud of. John, we've been talking here a pretty good while. Those of you who don't know John Herron, he's lives in Pensacola. He's a commercial airline pilot, former Navy pilot. He's as much a Pensacola citizen as many of us are. John's on a layover, I believe, in his commercial flying business, so we're not going to tie him up much longer. But John, I want to give the sort of the 5G, what's it all about for stupid, for dummies, synopsis of what something we've talked about previously, in that is 5G really just about mobile wireless devices? What's really going on, and why the rush to get 5G deployed and the apparent lack of transparency, maybe nationwide, on the rollout? What's really at play here?
That's a great question, John. And a lot of people, there's so much misinformation out there. That's what makes it so hard to figure out. And now that 5G is rolling out, we're seeing that the speeds for people like you and I really aren't that fast. And now that even tech magazines are writing about that. Now, if you get right under a 5G pole, the speed is lightning fast, and you can download a video in about 6 seconds. But once you get a block or two away from the pole, forget about it. It's just like 4G. And now even executives from the wireless companies are saying, well, it really wasn't meant to be any faster than 4G. So why? Well, the speeds at which it travels, it offers low latency. And what that means is the back and forth transmission is very, very quick. And whereas 4G enabled things like Uber and all the apps on our phones and things like that, that's what 4G was really about. 5G, what we're learning it's really about, is things like smart city technology, interconnecting everything together, the Internet of Things, machines to machines, automation,
Driverless cars,
automated cars. That's it. I mean, that's what it's really about. And specifically here in Pensacola, at one point there was a conversation of bringing Singapore into our smart cities technology.
Oh my. better tread carefully there, but
But
go ahead.
Exactly. That's exactly the point. And when we first heard that, it was discussed before the UWF magazine. We're like, this is a terrible idea because it's fraught with potential hacking and cyber. I mean,
Well, Singapore is a beautiful city, but it's also the global capital of surveillance. As the Singaporean military guys have always told me, we're just a small island nation surrounded by enemies. We have to have the world's premier city surveillance systems. So,
yes, and a lot of my friends that lay over there on occasion find the same thing. And the same thing with 5G in China. We're in a race with China for 5G. And in fact, in China, they used 5G technology and the smart city technology to imprison over 1 million Muslim Uyghurs in Xinjiang, China. And that's what it's capable of doing. Now, I'm not suggesting that's what's going to happen here.
Right. No, we're not I don't think as a society, John, we're afraid of surveillance. But I think surveillance in a democracy requires extraordinary oversight.
Right.
And I think my personal opinion from what I read, and I'm not supposed to be opinionated here, but these companies have invested massive amounts of money. And I believe Fortune magazine recently reported that Verizon has spent so much money on acquiring the bandwidth, the spectrum, so to speak, from government auctions, that their value as a public company has actually diminished because their balance sheet has been thrown out of kilter because of the capital spending they've had to do, which leads me to always think, why are they doing this? They can't get this capital recovered in monthly wireless fees from citizens. What else is involved here?
Well, you bring up a huge point, John, and I'm going to touch on two other potential applications in Pensacola and then address that head on. And one other application, though, is it was reported in the Pensacola News Journal that there's a conversation with someone who wants the vertical takeoff and landing taxi service to be brought to Pensacola. And he wants that where you can go to Pensacola Airport, get this helicopter drone type device, step in, put in your credit card, and then it delivers you to downtown. Now, the problem with this is these things fly over our homes. And, I keenly appreciate the fact that things that fly have a tendency to sometimes fall out of the sky at the most inappropriate times. And
at the wrong time, yeah.
Yeah. And the applicant for this service is a car dealer in the area. Now, and if he wants to invest in that and it wants the ambition to do that, that's fine. But we have to have rigorous safety policies in place, and they shouldn't get any leeway from the FAA if this thing's flying over. And the other point is a very important point is we should have a say where these things fly if we're going to go down that road or airspace. So that's another thing in Pensacola that I've seen. I've also heard recently that the single ST, part of the ST deal, they want the ability to have automation to drive parts from one part of the airport to the other. Well, and that's the thing. We're not against 5G as much as, hey, if you need it in industrial areas, do it. Right. Okay. If you need it in business areas, I understand that. But right next to our homes, especially when we're not getting faster speeds, no, we have some say about that. You have to show to us that we're going to benefit from it.
Right. And I don't think any of us are against progress.
Absolutely.
I used to, as a younger person, I used to laugh at the old videos of a grandpa sitting on the porch, poo-pooing the Model T Ford as it came by because he had a mule and a buggy whip in the back. That's not what we're talking about here. No. Progress is something we all want, I believe. Right. But the technology and our desire to move so quickly with very little transparency, I think should bring concern to all citizens. Again, I think the Pensacola City Council has shown maybe a stronger interest in this than their predecessors did. And I'm not sure about our neighbors in Milton and Fort Walton Beach, over in Okaloosa, Destin, those areas. how it's all playing out over there. But I've noticed you have a growing, the group in Pensacola Beach has joined with you as well. You want to say something about those folks?
Well, they've been wonderful, and they are rightly concerned because, I mean, one of the reasons my wife and I moved back here is because of our beautiful beaches. And every time I'm home, I'm going to spend my time at the beach. And these things are popping up there like pin cushions, for crying out loud. And they're rightly concerned. They're taking positive steps. They're working with the Santa Rosa Island Authority. And from what I understand, they have a new person in charge there, and he's wonderful. He's working with folks, and they're looking at what we're doing. And they're probably, depending on how the FCC decides this matter, they may take action as well. And we're hoping that our petition has a positive impact, not just for us, but for all the other cities along the Panhandle and perhaps in the country too. You touched on really an interesting thing with what these wireless companies are spending on the new frequency bands. And you're right, they spent $70 billion with a B on this award, and that's the C-band award. And that's the lower frequency. And I think they're realizing the higher frequencies, the problems are they don't have the money to put that many poles in neighborhoods, number two. And number two, what people don't know, and they're finding out right now in China, the power required to power all this equipment is unbelievable. The China telecoms now are finding out that the power requirements for these poles are 10 times the revenue they generate. So they're now going to the state, and we're talking about China now, okay?
John, is it possible that instead of selling wireless telephone service to consumers, that the big payoff for these carriers, wireless carriers, is in collecting your data and reselling it?
Well, it's exactly what it's for. And that's what they found out in San Diego. That's what they found out in Portland. That's what they found out in Toronto, Canada. And San Diego, they found out there was 4,000 surveillance cameras collecting data, and nobody knew about it. Even the city council didn't know about it. And so the mayor found out about it, the public uproar, and he said, okay, we're going to shut it down. It's only for the police. That didn't help matters because they didn't have warrants. It was warrantless surveillance going on 24/7. So that they just shut them all down. But the initial vendor for these cameras made a ton of money selling private personal data to other companies. And there's a book written about this, surveillance capitalism, where it's just a new revenue generating model. Instead of wireless companies providing a service for a fee, they're looking at collecting data and generating revenue that way. And right now, before the Florida legislature, a bill sponsored by Fiona McFarland from Sarasota. It's HB 969, and it's going through the House right now. And Florida will be the third state to address this issue of data privacy and the fact that if anybody's going to collect data, they got to tell you. And it's not that they give you the opt-out option, they have to give you the opt-in option early on. And that they tell you what data is being collected, that if they collect something and it's false information, the consumers have the ability to change it, fix it. And that if they do so and don't follow the state law, then consumers have some recourse against these entities. And that's going through the House right now. And Governor DeSantis is a big supporter of it. It's a bipartisan type bill, because I think we all realize that in this new world of data information and collection, we do have some rights. You know, it's a basic fundamental American right.
If you're just joining with us, we're with citizen advocate John Herron, Pensacola resident, who has led a group of citizens who have formally petitioned the Federal Communications Commission, a national agency, concerning the deployment of 5G infrastructure in Pensacola. John has been gracious enough to share a lot of time, and I've noticed a large audience has joined with us throughout this discussion. And John, there's a lot we could talk about on here. You know, we keep up with your group frequently, and but I want to say to you, to all of you who are joining with us, as John pointed out, when a Learjet full of a wireless carrier company lobbyists descend upon a local municipality and then depart. It's awful hard for ordinary citizens to play on that field on a level basis. So we like to give voice here to engaged citizens in Pensacola who don't have Learjets and Gucci shoes and Gucci briefcases, and who can swoop down in Tallahassee upon our elected officials. We want you to hear our citizen advocate stories. So if it's 5G or stormwater flooding or any issue that you feel overpowered and have no voice, then you may have found a home with us here at Studio 850. So John, thank you. Thank you very much for joining with us. You have any parting words or advice for our audience?
Yeah, well, three simple things, really. Number one, stay engaged. It's the story that you promote. An engaged citizen, an engaged community makes a great community. Learn about this 5G. Demand that your city council representatives give you more information. Two great websites to visit: the Environmental Health Trust, wonderful website led by Deborah Davis. She's a Nobel Peace Prize winner for environmental issues. Also, Americans for Responsible Science, Responsible Technology. Two great websites, and they're leading the charge for the FCC to update this. Write to your city council person. Let them know your thoughts on this issue. Listen to Studio 850. John, you realized this was an important issue early on, and thank you for all you've done and the voice you've given people like myself and my neighbors. We're all very grateful for what you do.
John Herron, Citizens for a Smart 5G. I'm just giving you a new title there. Citizens for Smart Telecommunications Policy has been our guest this morning. We want to thank all of you who've been with us. As always, let us know how we're doing. Your feedback helps make us better every day. We do this for you. So thank you so much. And until next time, engaged citizens, take good care of yourself. And John, as always, fly safe, my friend.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time.